above. Resuming debate, the honourable member from Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, proportional representation is fundamentally about ensuring Parliament reflects how people voted. It's about upholding each citizen's right to equal treatment under election laws and equal representation in our democracy. Unfortunately, our current electoral system, first past the post, is outdated and unfair. It doesn't accurately represent how people voted. It creates false majorities. It results in barriers to participation for women, racially marginalized, and other equity-deserving groups. And it results in worse outcomes for everyday people, including on things like the environment, the economy, health, and tackling inequality. At a time when people are struggling to make ends meet, when we are witnessing the devastating impacts of the climate crisis, increasingly divisive politics, we need to ask the question, is our current system serving Canadians? And I would say no. Before getting into politics, I taught political sociology at the University of Victoria. I also lectured in political science classes on the topic of electoral reform, and I co-hosted a television program called Voting for Change. It brought experts, elected officials, and community leaders on to discuss proportional representation. It's clear to me that proportional representation is a more fair, more effective, and more engaging democratic system, and Canadians would benefit from this change. But regardless of which electoral system you prefer, the process of engaging Canadians in a citizens' assembly is one that everyone should be able to get behind. Of course, the Liberal Party doesn't want this because it reminds people that the Prime Minister failed to deliver on his promise to reform our electoral system. He made a firm and unequivocal commitment, which his team and he repeated over 1,800 times. 1,800 times he told Canadians that 2015 would be the last election under first past the post. Canadians believed this promise. It would have been the right thing to do, but it was one of the first of many promises he would break to Canadians. And over the past 8 years, the Liberals have shown that they are more interested in maintaining power and the status quo than ensuring that every vote counts. Very true. Canadians deserve leaders that follow through on their promises, leaders that have a sense of integrity, leaders willing to listen to the voices of Canadians. Instead, we have a Prime Minister who Canadians no longer trust, a party that has broken their trust so many times that people now joke that the worst thing for a policy is to be an explicit Liberal commitment. Policies have a much better chance if they are unspoken, vested interests of wealthy Liberal insiders. Trust has been broken. And this is why a citizens' assembly is such an important tool. Citizens' assembly have legitimacy and public trust because they are independent, nonpartisan, and they are a representative body of citizens. 78% of Canadians support the idea of striking a nonpartisan, independent citizens' assembly on electoral reform, which isn't surprising when Canadians are feeling disheartened by the polarization of politics, concerned about the health of Canada's democracy, witnessing low voter turnout and voter disengagement. Citizens' assemblies have been used successfully in Canada and in other countries around the world to tackle difficult issues through nuanced public deliberation. And while 90% of Canadians want a parliament that reflects how people voted, a citizens' assembly on electoral reform would give citizens a leadership role in building consensus on the specific model for electoral reform for Canada. To me, and to the majority of Canadians, it's clear that proportional representation is a fairer and more democratic system. It ensures that every vote counts and that all voices are heard. It would lead to a more representative government that truly reflects the diversity of our country. And the research backs it up. Proportional systems have better representation of women, racialized groups, 2S LGBTQ plus folks, and other equity-seeking groups. Canada has an embarrassingly low percentage of women in Parliament. The House has never reflected the diversity of our country, and there is an abundance of research showing how proportional representation increases representation of marginalized groups, creating new avenues of political power for groups traditionally denied fair access to power and representation. And representation matters. A true democracy isn't just a system that represents the majority, but one that also represents and upholds and protects the rights of minority folks. And right now, when trans kids are facing such intense discrimination and hate from right-wing elected leaders, it's important that we ensure that their voices are represented in Parliament.
Hear, hear.
And to trans kids, I want to say, we see you, we hear you, and we will stand with you. Proportional representation also encourages parties to work together. And since no party is likely to win a majority of seats in the legislature, it leads to more cooperation and compromise. Parties being forced to work together leads to more inclusive policy making. And as they're forced to consider the views of other parties and their constituents and enact more representative policies that reflect the needs and interests of a broader range of systems, we get better policy. It also helps governments avoid policy whiplash. Under first past the post, you typically oscillate between two parties that frequently win false majorities. Policy whiplash happens when, in a polarized system, Party A comes in and undoes the majority of policies of Party B. They start their own agenda, and then when they're defeated, Party B comes in and undoes all the work of Party A. This happens back and forth to the detriment of citizens. It wastes bureaucratic resources and stalls progress that would support Canadians. Proportional representation forces parties to work together, which helps to reduce political polarization and gridlock. It can lead to more stable and effective governance as parties are less inclined to undo the work that's gone on before when they were included in creating it. You get greater continuity because it requires greater consensus. Overall, proportional representation can help create more inclusive, representative, and effective democracies. We've seen a glimpse of what that is when we've had minority parliaments in Canada. We wouldn't have healthcare in Canada if it weren't for a minority parliament forcing Lester B. Pearson to work across party lines with Tommy Douglas. We wouldn't be rolling out dental care for the first time in Canada if New Democrats hadn't used our power in a minority government to force the Liberals to provide dental care.
Hear, hear.
We get better policies when we work together. But I think one of the most compelling arguments for proportional representation is that people want to vote for what inspires them. They want to vote for the candidate who best aligns with the vision they have for the future. And unfortunately, our current system requires them often to vote for what they don't want. People want to see their vote count. It's part of the reason proportional representation increases voter turnout. Many people are strategically voting, but it's demotivating. Under our current first-past-the-post system, many Canadians feel like their vote doesn't matter. Proportional representation would ensure that every vote counts. It would allow a more diverse range of voices to be heard in Parliament. It would encourage greater voter turnout as people feel their vote actually matters. The Liberal government has claimed that proportional representation would lead to unstable governments. It's simply not true. Many countries around the world use proportional representation. They have stable governments. In fact, the vast majority of OECD countries use proportional systems. And proportional representation can lead to more stable government as parties are forced to work together. And I think we've all seen very clearly how our current first-past-the-post system has an incredible amount of divisive politics in it. And you can just look down to the United States, to put it mildly, to see the examples of majority systems with divisive politics. When designing a made-for-Canada proportional system, we also have the opportunity to make it more difficult for extremist parties to gain power, as you can set thresholds that would require parties to win a significant portion of the vote in order to gain seats in Parliament. It's time for the Liberal government to stop making excuses and start listening to the voices of Canadians. We need a government that's committed to democratic reform, that's willing to take action to ensure that every vote counts. It's why I'm joining the member from Nanaimo Ladysmith to call for a Citizens' Assembly on proportional representation. It's time for people to get on board and understand that Canadians deserve a voice. The government needs to listen. Proportional representation is the future of democracy in Canada. Let's put in place a fairer system where Parliament truly reflects how people voted. Join me in calling for a citizens' assembly on proportional representation, and together we can create a more just and fair Canada. Thank you.